First off, I would just like to say thank you for inviting me, and I would like to express my utmost respect and gratitude to all of you for persisting with events like this, because through events like this, even amidst the pandemic, we get to assert our rightful places in society. When I came out as a trans woman, actually, to be honest, the reaction of people around me weren't that much shocked. It's not like it's my first time to come out. I actually came out thrice. I first came out as a queer because way back then I know that I am not straight, but at the same time, I am not yet sure of where I fit within the spectrum, or how I should identify myself, because there is not enough sexual education or discussions with regards to soji way back then when I was a child and growing up. But later on, as I entered the university, as I was exposed to academic freedom, and that freedom to know more of the ideologies of ourselves, I was able to come out second as a non-binary. But then through my connections with other people, I get to realize that I feel more comfortable and much aligned with myself when I am addressed and affirmed that I am a woman, thus me coming out as a trans woman. Their reactions, were either neutral or they celebrated for it. I actually feel a lot of love and support from people, not just in the household, but as well as the university, because I came out as a trans woman when I won a university-wide modeling competition in the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, which is PT's Next Top Model. And I think that is also sort of what I use as a protection to myself, that bit of privilege that comes after winning, because it has sort of lightened up the mood and made people accept more of who I am. It is, kumbaga, my first line of defense when I came out as a trans woman. And I have to recognize as well uh, that privilege is not the same thing that happens to a lot of trans people. That is why I would also have to say na it is not good actually on my part that I had to navigate through knowing more about myself through unnecessary ways, through unnecessary measures or paths. Because there is no one guiding me. On what being a trans woman is, on what soji is. That is why I came out thrice, because there is no genuine education when it comes to gender and sexuality. And I think yun din yung dapat na i-raise natin. Kasi if we were to argue na our education should be conservative, so should be because they want to protect trans youth, or they want to protect the youth from quote unquote mapalihis yung landas, like what they raise on the patriarchal system, or in our institutions, sa religion, sa academic institutions, on what is being perpetrated na mentality na mali yung pagiging member ng LGBTQ+. In that sense, actually, napupunta sa maling paths to navigate themselves yung mga members ng LGBTQIA+ community. And they would oftentimes blame it on us, because they say we chose this lifestyle ko, no, because we chose to be a member of the LGBTQ+. But I would say it is not a choice. It is natural because we have existed long ago. And if it is not natural, why would we choose a life of being oppressed just to validate our existence? And thus it poses a question kung alin ba talaga yung hindi natural. Is it our identities, or is it these systems, these man-made systems? And I think it is clear naman na these systems imposed on us are the ones that really put us to unhealthy means of knowing more about ourselves. And as these systems are man-made or were constructed by man, so can it be deconstructed by men, by people. Siguro a part of that response coming from the people around me also came from the fact na I first came out as a queer. So alam mo yon, hindi siya ganon kabigat when I came out as a trans woman because they already know that I am not straight. At some certain level, nag-tone down yung agitation nila when it comes to me being a member of the LGBTQ plus. But then again, this is not the case for a lot of LGBTQ plus members because somehow me being privileged of the education that I got from the university, I was able to protect myself through educating people more about my identity. But what about those who did not have access to this education? Ano? It also brings me to those who are still having negative reactions when I came out. Kasi hindi naman lahat ng tao ay nakita yung level of progression ko into knowing more about my soji, into knowing more about my identity, and more so as a trans woman. Yung iba ay galing pa sa yung last time na nakita nila ako ay when I was in elementary. So I have this principal that I am really close with. Actually, she helped me enter college because I am the valedictorian of our school way back then, and she really sees a lot of potential. She supports me. But when she saw that I am a trans woman, she got disappointed. She confronted me. But then I was able to tell her, to enlighten her of my identity. Kasi no matter how our biases separate us, no matter how religious institutions try to antagonize certain identities such as ours, should still go back to the core of our belief, which is love, which is compassion towards one another, despite of our differences. And I think more than anything else, more than how our institutions were being weaponized against marginalized communities, we should be reminded of its core essence, which is that of being loving and compassion. Now it is up to us who have this privilege to shed light more on our community so it wouldn't be harder for those who are far from this education. And thus we should also call for a genuine sex education as well as the passage of the Soji Equality Bill on this aspect, so that people of diverse Soji wouldn't have to go through dangerous paths just so they can navigate their identities. I would also come back to the reason why people around me were able to accept me more. It is because they have seen trans narratives who have been successful, which has been all right, just like any other person there is, So it were because of those pioneers that I was able to easily come out as a trans woman. And now it is up to me, up to us in this current generation to further this path paved by those pioneers so it will be easier for those coming after us. When you said success, or let's say achievement in general, it brings me back to my recent events, to my interviews as Miss Trans Global Philippines, and to the recent meeting the Avance that I've had. Because if you don't know yet, I am recently the student-elect and first ever openly identifying trans woman president of the Central Student Council of the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. And when I was asked during meeting the Avance whether to choose academic achievement or leadership achievement, it brought me back to the realization that whatever I have achieved now, may it be in leadership, may it be in academic, or may it be in pageantry, I was never alone. It is always through collective efforts, why I am confidently standing here, why I am speaking here in front of you as Miss Trans Global Philippines. I would think of success as something that is not personal to us, something that is not for ourselves alone, but for a greater purpose. It will only be genuine success or achievement if it is anchored through the aspirations and the success, the achievement of a whole collective, of the broad masses. Because as I have said earlier, I know that I was able to be who I am today because of those who persisted way before me, despite of fear of persecution, despite of them facing constant fear of being killed in the streets just because they chose to be who they are, just because they chose to be visible, just because they show representation for us. And that is also the power of representation. But it is because of them that I was able to easily take up space, not just in pageantry, but even in positions of leadership. And actually, being the first ever openly identifying trans woman president in our university is actually kind of a double-edged sword to me, because it is nice that I was able to widen the path, let's say, for our community. But it is also painful to think of na ako yung first ever. Kasi I know there are a lot of better trans leaders, and I shouldn't have been the first ever trans woman president. But because there are existing oppressive systems in our society, they constantly contain us into boxes or into barriers that they wouldn't let us take up space in whatever space there is in society. And even up to now, that persists. Ano? Even in pageantry, patuloy yung pag-exclude sa trans woman. Patuloy yung pag-exclude sa trans people sa fields ng leadership, sa fields ng sports. And kahit sa simpleng pag-CR sa ating mga restrooms na align sa ating identity, ay hindi nila maibigay sa atin. So in that sense, na collective always yung ating sense of success. This collectiveness is not just existing in the current generation. It transcends the generation. It roots back to Marcia, who first threw the brick in the Stonewall riots. It roots back to our Babaylan ancestors and Catalonan ancestors who were burned, who were erased of their existence because our colonizers were afraid of seeing strong women and feminine identities lead in our society. It roots back to the Mentifuwale, those narratives. It roots back to the roughly 200 protesters of the first ever Pride Parade in the Philippines during 1996. And it transcends our generation. We stand here as the hopes of those who will come after us and those who came before us to reclaim the future, so that there will no longer be called the so-called first ever trans woman in whatsoever spaces, but just trans women, just people taking up spaces just as anyone else.